Hey everyone, I'm Katie from Addicted to DIY, and today I'm going to be showing you how I made this bandsaw box with a wireless speaker. So this project is part of a group challenge with a whole bunch of fellow makers called the Build at Home Challenge. And the idea is for us to dig through our scrap piles and build a project using just the things that we have around our homes. So prior to beginning this project, I polled my audience on Instagram and asked them what I should build. I gave them the options of building maybe something small with my hardwood scraps or something bigger with my larger supply of scraps, which is predominantly knotty alder. The overwhelming majority said that I should build something with my hardwood scraps. So that's what I did. I came up with the idea for a bandsaw box, which has been on my bucket list for a while, and I made this one out of a combination of Baltic birch plywood and walnut. So there are a ton of amazing bandsaw box tutorials out there, so I wanted to figure out something that would stand out a little bit, be a little bit more unique, so I decided to add a wireless speaker to it right here. I happen to have that on hand. I had ordered it I think probably about 1.5 years ago and just hadn't used it yet, kind of forgot about it actually, and I found it in a box about 2 weeks ago. So when I was coming up with the ideas for this project, I came across it again and decided it would be perfect to add to this. So follow along with me and I'll show you how I made my very first bandsaw box. I started by cutting down a walnut board from my scrap pile, cutting about 9 inches off of the end of it with my miter saw. I moved over to my table saw and ripped it down so I had 2 4¼ inch wide pieces. I had already cut and glued up some scraps of Baltic birch and had originally intended to use these as a prototype. I liked the look of the stacked plies so much that I decided to use it for the middle of my bandsaw box. It was a 9x9 square, so I cut it in half on my bandsaw. I took everything over to my workbench and started gluing all of the wood together, sandwiching the Baltic birch between the walnut. I clamped it all together and then let it cure overnight. Once the glue was cured, I took the wood out of the clamps and then cut out the design. I drew this design based on the size of the wood that I had, and you can follow the link in my description below for the template. Pay no mind to the legs added to it. I was just playing around and thought it might look cool, but I opted to leave them off. I used spray adhesive to apply the template to the wood and then smoothed it all out. I swapped out the 1/2 inch resaw blade on my bandsaw with a 1/4 inch blade and started cutting out the shape of the box. Once the outside shape was cut out, I took it over to my belt sander and sanded it down smooth. Next, I needed to cut the back of the box, so I set my fence up to cut 1/2 inch off the back of the wood block. Once it was cut, I set that piece aside and lined up the blade to my template so I could cut the drawer portion out. This part was definitely the most nerve-wracking, as there is really not any room for mistakes. Mistakes on the outside shape of the box can be sanded out and worked with. Going askew on this step would essentially ruin the entire thing. So you can imagine how high my anxiety level went when I almost finished with this cut and the blade fell off the wheel. I originally thought the blade was broken, but after getting it set back on and readjusted, I was back in business and finished off the cut. With the drawer portion cut out, I took the box back over to my workbench to glue it back together where I had cut out the drawer. I used the flat end of my glue brush to shove the glue into the gap and then clamped it all together. I cleaned up the excess glue with a damp rag to save myself the headache of sanding it later. The portion of the box that I cut out needed to also be run by the sander to smooth it out before I got to work on it. When I was finished sanding, I took it back over to the bandsaw. I needed to cut off the front and back sides that would become the front and back of the drawer box. I set my fence to cut the back at 1/4 inch thick, and then set my fence to 1/2 inch and cut off the front. I used a pencil and drew out where I would perform my next cut, leaving the walls to be a little over 1/4 inch thick. Once I was finished drawing it out, I set my bandsaw back up and cut out the inside of the drawer. I sanded the drawer box and the front and back pieces down smooth on my belt sander to remove the saw marks and ensure a tight glue joint. I took them over to my workbench and sandwiched all of the pieces together with glue, then clamped them together. With the glue joint dry on the main part of the box, I took it and the back over to the sander and also sanded them both down smooth to glue them back together. I spread an even coat of glue over the wood and then clamped everything together and set it aside to dry. In the meantime, I knew I'd need a little drawer pull, so I cut a small piece of walnut and sanded it smooth and gave it a little bit of a shape. Once the glue was dry on the drawer, I removed the clamps and took it back over to the sander to smooth everything out again and remove any glue squeeze out. I then went back to my workbench and gave it a final sanding with 220 grit sandpaper. I removed the outer portion of the box from the clamps and took it to my drill press, fitted with a 1 7/8 inch Forstner bit, to drill holes for the wireless speakers. On the front of the box, I drilled the hole about 2 inches deep. I flipped the box over and marked the hole location on the back with a pencil, then drilled that hole about 1 inch deep. At my workbench, I drilled a 7/16 inch hole through the center of the larger holes to feed the speaker wires through. I sanded the whole thing down again on my belt sander and finished it off with 220 grit sandpaper, just as I did with the drawer. I fit the drawer into place and then attached the little wooden knob with some CA glue and activator spray. You'll notice the drawer is a bit smaller in one corner than it originally was intended to be. My belt sander took off a little bit more than I'd planned. Once both pieces were cleaned up and dusted off, I applied some light coats of polyurethane spray to seal them. With the finish dry on the bandsaw box, it was time to install the wireless speaker. I followed the instructions included with the kit and fit the speaker into place, feeding the wires through the hole in the middle. I plugged the wires into the back and then carefully fit it into place. Once the speaker is charged, it will be ready to enjoy. While the bandsaw box isn't perfect, I'm still really pleased with how this first attempt turned out. There's so many different possibilities with designs, and I'm excited to make more. One great thing about these is that you can make them so many different shapes and sizes while using up those precious scraps in your shop. I hope you enjoyed watching this tutorial today. For more projects just like this one, be sure that you subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the bell icon so that you'll be alerted every time I publish a new video. Thanks so much for watching.